Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Daily Coin. And my name is Rory, and on the line I have Mr. Jeff Brown, Jeff J. Brown, who is the author of 44 Days. And this is a fascinating look at China through Western eyes, and it gives you a completely different perspective of what you may think you know about China. And without any further ado, Mr. Jeff Brown.
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to tell your fans out there a little bit about something that China is doing that almost nobody in the West perceives. I mean, they see things happening, but they really haven't connected all the dots.
Okay.
And so I think your readers are going to be in for a real treat, because this analysis about what China is doing on the world stage, I'm sharing it for the first time. So and it's actually going to be a part of my book that I'm writing. I'm writing Xi Jinping's diaries as historical fiction, and I actually have passages in the diary where Xi Jinping is writing about this very same subject. And it goes way back in history. You know, we always talk about poisoning the well. And, you know, back ever since, Alexander the Great, and probably before him and definitely after him, if a receding power could not control a certain geographical area or dominate a certain people, to spite the fact that they had to leave, they would poison the well. You know, they would fill the wells up with, hacked up body parts or animal dung or, dead animals or whatever they could. They would poison the wells in order to make sure that the incoming or returning power could not inhabit that area just out of spite.
Yeah.
And with 500 years of colonialism, it became worldwide with the British, and then it was handed off to the United States. And a lot of people don't realize, you would find this very interesting, but and with the history of the South and the United States, but one of the very first modern poisoning of the wells was the British support of the southern states. They were so full of venom and hatred for the North, for managing to split themselves off from the British Empire, that they went out of their way to help the South with preferential trade and tariff agreements, and sugar, tobacco, etc., textiles, machinery, that kind of thing. And let's face it, back in those days, the slave trade was also very profitable. And so that was what I call the first ante. The British really, that became kind of a model for the future. And some historians say that the fact that the Brits actually treated the South as an independent country helped them come to the decision that they should secede from the North. And then so the British had a good model. And then, came Ireland. And so they had the anti-North, they seceded, they had to pull out of the Republic of Ireland. And so they managed to, carve out Northern Ireland. And then came India, and they managed to partition India so that there would be an anti-India in Pakistan, and then another one in Bangladesh. And it just keeps going on. When they had to pull out of the Middle East, from 1917 until 1948, they carved out Israel in the Middle East to have sort of an anti-Muslim, anti-Arab state there. And then China when Mao came to power in 1949, the Americans, at this point now, it was no longer the Brits, it was the Americans who took over the British Empire. They, Taiwan, the Americans went out of their way to help Chiang Kai-shek establish himself in Taiwan. Then Korea, South Korea, then Vietnam, South Vietnam. That one didn't work out so well.
No.
And it just goes on, and it hasn't really stopped. Southern Sudan, the West was able to carve off the Southern Sudan. Just in this century, they destroyed Yugoslavia, and this whole policy of poisoning the well and creating these anti-states has kind of morphed into these color revolutions in in the Ukraine and Venezuela and elsewhere. And so I think what has happened is Xi Jinping and China has seen this model, and they're kind of going, well, why can't we do this, back at the West? And I think they really are. And what they have done is they have actually expertly created an anti-entity to everything that the West has developed as a post-colonial, the Bretton Woods, post-World War II world order. They really have come up with an to poisons the Western wells, and it's sort of a great turn of the tables on the West. And so you have things like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization,
yes,
with Russia to be the anti of NATO. You have the BRICS Bank.
yep,
The Chinese just cut a $50 billion check, for the BRICS Bank,
yep,
to be the anti of the World Bank. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. They have they now have to go up against the London, metal exchange. They now have the Shanghai global
gold
exchange.
Yep.
They have the gold exchange. They now have their own. They now have their own SWIFT for bank transfers called CRIFT. The China Russia. And that's something else we should probably talk about too, is how much China and Russia are literally like Siamese twins now.
It's incredible.
They just in a huge humiliation for the United States and for the West was at the APEC meeting in November here in Beijing, when 13 months ago, well, now about 14 months ago, January 2014, Xi Jinping announces, let's do an Asian infrastructure investment bank for Asia. It's obviously the anti-entity to the Asian Development Bank, which is heavily dominated by Japan and the United States. In 13 months, that bank became a reality at the APEC meeting. The United States was humiliated because 20 countries signed up at APEC. The United States worked furiously to try to derail it. The only two countries that did not sign on for its inception were guess who? Australia and Japan. So right under the nose of Obama in Beijing, every other country except Indonesia, they had just had an election, and they finally joined I think about a month later. So the only two countries that have not signed on yet are Japan and Australia. I think the UK just joined. last week, much to the anger of the United States. So this huge Asian infrastructure investment bank is now dwarfing what the Asian Development Bank is doing.
Well,
The BRICS Bank is.
the UK really
Go
doesn't
ahead. Go
have
ahead, Corey.
the UK doesn't really have any choice, geographically speaking, because
Yeah.
they're so close, as well as
Yeah.
they are so dependent upon the trade. So they really, and
Mm-hmm.
that's why they are doing the direct currency swaps as well. I mean, it's
Mm-hmm.
not like,
Absolutely.
they cannot afford to not have that partnership. And as
Well,
far as
plus the legacy of Hong Kong and the Hong Kong stock market, and now they've combined. The Chinese are combining electronically the Shanghai and Hong Kong stock markets, and they're going to also combine the gold markets in Shanghai and Hong Kong.
yes,
Yeah, and with the British legacy there, the British have no choice, and so actually
right,
Europe doesn't have any choice either because it's the number one trading country in the world.
yes, and
So it's really interesting, and it's just insane. Now the Chinese have started digging the Nicaragua Canal.
yes,
I mean, it's to go up against the Panama Canal.
right,
I mean, it's just mind-boggling what the Chinese are doing, and it's so obvious what they're doing.
yes,
They are going to they are taking. I'm sure if they and they're basically getting around the Suez Canal by all of their Silk Roads and Belts initiatives here in Asia, building highways and gas lines and pipelines and high-speed rail
yes,
and transport rail all over Asia. And so they're basically nullifying sort of the anti-Suez Canal. And so they really have taken a page out of the Western colonial playbook and are just shoving it back in the face of the United States and the West. And the West has no response to it because the Chinese have what the West used to have, and that's money.
well, no,
And they've got billions of dollars.
and they have manufacturing, which the West no longer has. They actually have steel
Which the West no
factories.
longer, yeah.
They have steel factories.
Yeah.
They have, or steel foundries, I should say, and they have all of the infrastructure required to do business. What the West has is
Mm.
infrastructure to do war, and that's it. That's the business model of the go forward for the Western world. The West is only interested in creating chaos and war, and the East,
Absolutely.
in particular, China, Russia, and India, are only considered are they are only concerned with conducting business. They aren't concerned with conducting war. Because war
Yeah.
goes against the grain of doing business with another country. And China, Russia, and
Absolutely.
India only are concerned with doing business, and the West is only concerned with doing war, and that's it.
Hmm. You're exactly right, Rory. And then I would like to say, just so that to put things in perspective, I don't think the Chinese and Xi Jinping got this idea about creating anti-entities on their own. I really, as I was doing my research on writing my newest book, I noticed that it was actually Hugo Chavez in Venezuela and Kirchner in Argentina, Lula in Brazil, Fidel in Cuba, and then later Correa in Ecuador and Evo Morales in Bolivia. But they were the ones that really got this idea of the anti-entity, regional cooperation, regional support, regional, trade. And, they were the ones that started ALBA, back in 2004. Hugo Chavez is not really an anti to OPEC, but Venezuela created Petrocaribe to help share the resources of the petroleum resources of the region in Latin America. One of the most brilliant things that Chavez and those guys did was to create Telesur, the media group for to report the news. And if your listeners are not looking at Telesur, TELESUR, but you can definitely look at all their programs on the internet. And I'm sure that's where Russia Today and Sputnik News got some of their inspiration was from Telesur.
Wow.
Because that was created in 2005. And then, one of the greatest things that, Chavez and those guys did is they shot down the Americas, free trade agreement of the Americas, which was just another, giveaway for the Fortune 500 to export more jobs and create more poverty in Latin America. They submarine that. Then they created, the UNASUR in 2008, which is busily working right now trying to fight the United States from overthrowing Venezuela. And they created the Bank of the South. And then they created CELAC, which is, basically every country in the Americas except the United States and Canada. In 2011. So I don't think, and then even Chavez and Castro started writing a book before Chavez was killed. Well, some people say he was killed by the CIA by being infected with cancer. But before he died, he and Fidel were actually writing a book, and now Xi Jinping's written a couple of books. So I really think that the Chinese, I mean, they're not bashful about borrowing great ideas from other people.
No.
After being around for 3,000 years, and I really think they got these ideas from Latin America and Chavez and Fidel.
Well, now as far as the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, I think that wasn't that developed, or the idea was born in like 1980. Something along those lines. I know that was an idea that was born a long time ago. I mean, not
Well,
that, not 3,000 years ago, but long. But,
well, Rory, I will research that, and the next time we get back on the air, I'll have an answer for you. I know that it was created, or at least founded, since the breakup of the Soviet Union, but I wouldn't be surprised because unfortunately, for a lot of reasons, the Russia and China, were at loggerheads back during the 50s and 60s, all the way up into the 70s. And so it wouldn't surprise me because, now it's the exact opposite. I mean, now they are like a double helix, economically, financially. It was really interesting. The Chinese are just thumbing their noses at the West. Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, just came out on international TV everywhere but the West. The West would never hear this because of all the censorship. But he came out and said, someone stuck a mic in his face and said, what is China's stance on the Russian sanctions? And he basically said, we're not going to worry about Russian sanctions. We're going to worry about our common interests and our common needs. So the Russians have China's back through all this chaos, as you described it, that the West is creating in Russia. So they really are married at the hip now, militarily, technologically, financially, trade wise. It's almost like a unitary country.
Yes, I would agree with that wholeheartedly, and I don't think that the United States or the Anglo American powers have the fortitude to deal with Russia and China collectively, militarily. Which, once again, that's all that we have. And we have no.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't fight anyone economically. We have no weapon except for the dollar, which is dying, and China, with all of the direct currency swaps that they are creating around the world, with not small economies, but the direct swap lines with Australia and France and the UK, Japan. These are not small economies. These are
Russia.
Russia. Thank you. I mean, these are massive economies that have a lot of power, economic power, and so we really
Absolutely.
have.
You're right.
So the dollar is being diminished every day, and its power is being absorbed into the East every single day. So it's so I'm not exactly sure why the why these talking heads in Washington D.C. and at number 10 Downing Street continue to push back on Russia in particular and try to just keep poking them in the eye and saying well you're the bad guy and the whole situation with Ukraine. I mean, my goodness, the whole point of that is there's two things that I see. A, they're trying to get bombs in Ukraine that would be at Russia's front door. And B, they're trying to either stifle or tax or do something about those pipelines that run out of Russia through Ukraine and into Southern Europe. So,
yeah,
like I said, I'm not that stupid that I can't see that. And as far as everything else that's around it, everything that comes out of the Western mainstream media is all theater, period.
oh, it's
Or
just
am I wrong?
kabuki theater.
Kabuki theater. I mean, it has nothing to do with the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
So,
And the thing is with the Ukraine is that it's a twofer for the United States, because a lot of people don't realize, but China had a huge amount of cooperation, scientific, commercial cooperation with Ukraine going back into the 70s. And so by turning the Ukraine into another failed state like Libya and Iraq and you could say Afghanistan and every place else that we seem to plant our armies. It's a double winner for the United States, because China has also been screwed out of all of its cooperation with the Ukraine, and now, even though you would never ever hear about Russia and China being allies. I was at a talk this week at a literary festival here in Beijing this weekend, and and I would say it was a fairly balanced presentation, but a well-known China expert from the mainstream media put a slide up and said that China's only ally is North Korea. It's just absurd fantasy. And
that's incredible.
But by attacking, so now anything that the United States does against Russia is de facto an attack against China, and any attack they do on China, the pivot, the Pacific pivot, is a de facto attack on Russia. So I think at the CIA level, the national, the Defense Intelligence Agency, the National Security Administration, the State Department, at that level, they know what's going on, but they really try to keep that information away from the public's eyes, because they don't want anybody to imagine that their imperial system might be threatened.
Well, unfortunately, it is threatened. and it's slipping away from them is what I
Hmm.
see, and they're trying desperately to hold on to what little bit that they have, and once again, all they have are guns. Which I'm not opposed to guns.
Well,
It's just
yeah,
how you use them, and in what manner
yeah.
they're used. So, like I said, I'm not opposed to guns. It's just the way that the United States government uses them is completely wrong. I mean, you don't just go around and assault people simply because you have guns. I mean, and that's what they
Mm.
do.
The other leg of the empire, Western Empire, of course, is the U.S. dollar, and because right now, the U.S. is paying for those guns, with printing presses as big as the Mall of America. And as long as they can keep printing money, I mean, literally trillions, not billions, but as long as they can keep printing trillions of dollars to pay for those trillions of dollars worth of military equipment. I mean, as you say, these are not six shooters and 22 rifles. These
Right.
are multi-billion dollar weapon systems, and so that is really the blood, the lifeblood of Western Empire is the U.S. dollar, and as you say, that's all empire ever ends up with is just guns and war. Look at the Roman Empire was no
Exactly.
different.
No different.
Towards the end, it was just inflation, which will eventually come to the West, hyperinflation, and military expansion and implosion. And although actually the eastern part did not really implode, it just the German tribes took over, but it eventually it collapsed. And so let's just I was talking to Kevin Barrett recently, and we were talking about that people are thinking, oh, the dollar's going to collapse rapidly. I'm not so sure. If you go back and look at the history of reserve currencies, hundreds of years ago, back when the Dutch were a big empire, in Indonesia, the Dutch florin was the reserve currency, and then it was the French franc, and then it was the British pound. And it takes time for these reserve currencies to be replaced. And I, as much as I'd like to see it happen tomorrow, and I think you and I would both, I think it's going to take longer for the U.S. dollar to collapse than you and I would like. And what do you think about that?
I think it's taken longer than I would like to this point. And as far as the dollar,
Yeah.
as far as it collapsing, I don't really see that. I ascribe to Catherine Austin Fitts' slow burn theory, in that
Mm-hmm. Okay.
you're not going to walk into a hospital room with a 12 gauge and just eliminate the patient. You're going to walk into that hospital room, and you're going to turn and you're going to turn that drip down as low as it will go, and keep that patient alive as long as possible by maintaining the proper drip that keeps just enough life in it to keep it
Mm-hmm.
going, in order for you to garner as much wealth from that patient as possible. And that's what I see happening. So it could go on for, in my from my perspective, it could go on for another decade. I don't really see that it will. I don't think that it will. I don't think that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and combined with the BRICS Development Bank, combined with the BRICS nations as a whole, the power, the economic power that they
Yeah.
have, I don't see that happening. I mean, I think that we are absolutely in the final throes of the we're on the death march of the dollar, the war dollar, as I call it, because it's backed by war. It's not
Yeah,
backed by
it's a good name. Yeah.
it's not backed by oil. It's not a petrodollar. At one time it was. Today it's a war dollar. Period. It's backed by blood and other people's blood, and that's it. But I don't see how it can. I don't think that. I'm not sure if it's going to see 2020 or not. I can't. I can't say. I don't know. I don't know if it's going to make it that long. But you have to remember that it's the slow burn that I'm referring to. That started in 1971 when Nixon closed the gold window and told the world that,
With the Nixon, yeah, when he, yeah.
so
Well,
it's
that's when the
already.
printing presses started.
That's correct. So it's already been going on for, over 50 years or close to 50 years. So we are absolutely
Hmm.
at the end. And according to Mike Maloney, true fiat currencies have a life expectancy of about 40 years. So we're getting close. I mean, but what do you think? I mean,
Well,
what do you?
I hope you're right, Rory. Well, here's what I think. Just from sitting here in Beijing, I think that I loved your analogy about trying to absorb as much wealth as you can, or energy from the dying patient as possible. I think that the Chinese would be very happy for this slow drip, as you call it, to go on for another 20 or 30 years,
Yes.
because they are working very hard to, as you say, organize themselves, get those gas lines, those pipelines built between Russia and um, China. Build that. Of course, no one in the West even heard about it, but the Chinese and the Russians just signed off on a deal, and I'm sure they'll do it because they've got the money to do it. They just signed off on a high-speed rail between Beijing and Moscow, $232 billion, that will reduce the time of the travel between Moscow and Beijing down to 33 hours compared to 6 to 7 days now.
Wow.
And so I think they really want to, get these gas pipelines. The Chinese have just put their uh, oil, both oil and gas pipeline from Kunming down in Yunnan on the Burmese border. They now have a 10 million metric ton um, oil pipeline that goes from the coast of Burma up into China. They now have a 10, I think it's billion cubic meter gas pipeline from Burma to China. The Chinese have built the highest altitude highway in the world at almost over 4,000 meters through Pakistan into Xinjiang down to the Gwadar port, which now the Chinese are managing on the Indian Ocean. And the Russians are doing the same thing up in the Arctic now that the unfortunately is melting because of global warming. And so they are rapidly building roads across the borders with each other. So and another thing that nobody in the West heard about, but in December a container train. Well, it was only 1,000 metric tons, but it was a test, and they're working. And it's going to become very much commercial again to cut out worrying about having to deal with the Sixth Fleet through the Malacca Straits in Southeast Asia and being blockaded. A container train left north of Shanghai and in 21 days arrived in Madrid, Spain.
Oh my
And
goodness.
so now and it actually is through the Suez Canal. It's 6 weeks, and they actually got the goal is to get it down to 21 days. And so I think you're right. I think that they will. They're ignoring the West. They're going about their business. They are cooperating together to create a SWIFT bank account system together. They now have their own credit agency,
Right.
Corporate rating agency. They're just doing everything they can to get ready for the collapse of the dollar. And let's face it, Rory, when that happens, it's going to be cataclysmic. I mean, it's going to be, the end of the world as we know it. And so, and the last thing, and then I'll turn it back over to you. I don't think Russia and China want to be accused of the dollar collapsing. You and I both know that between the two of them, they have $4.5 trillion in foreign reserves, and a lot of that is American debt.
Right.
And all Russia and China would have to do to bring the darn thing down, they could bring it down in 2 weeks. They could just start selling U.S. Treasury notes.
Right.
And they would bring it down in less than a month. But they're not going to do that because, as you said, I think they want to get stronger and stronger. And I think they want the collapse to be, organically and, caused, or at least perceived as happening in Europe and the United States and not being caused by, Russia and China.
Well, I think that what's happening right now, and I may be wrong, but I believe that Europe and Japan are being set up as the fall guy for the collapse of the dollar. That's what it appears to be anyway. I mean, that may be a very elementary view of it, but that's what it looks like as far as the problems that Europe has, the economically. Everybody,
Mm-hmm.
anybody that knows anything about the economy and finance globally knows that Japan is just an absolute basket case, and they
Yeah, we're
have
even
been.
more indebted than we are.
Yes, and by multitudes. I mean, it's incredible, and it's been going on for 2 decades. So I'm not sure how much
Yeah, yeah,
longer.
yeah. Since the since the crash, the stock crashed back in, what was it, 88 or something
Yes.
like that, when the Tokyo stock market crashed and the real estate bubble
So I'm
popped.
not sure how much more life is there, And my friend and colleague over at Dave Kransler over at Investment Research Dynamics, he seems to think that there's going to be war prior to the collapse. Which, if you look at history, that I mean, he's right in that regard. If you look at history of how things have changed and how things have fallen apart, then that's what's always happened. Always, always, always. And no
Yeah.
no civilization or no monetary system has ever changed without there being war, either during or just preceding the collapse of that currency. And Rome is a great example of that. Just like you were saying,
Mm.
just like you were pointing out a minute ago, there was endless war, just like what we have right now in Rome, and that's what actually was their downfall, was their biggest issue. And they had they had stretched their empire the same as the United States has done. They they
And diluted their money with lead
and just clippings,
there's
just
silver, yeah, clippings and lead.
yeah. I mean, they've just taken cut the edges off, which is why we have the ribbed coins now. I mean, that's where that was born from. They would just take shears and just cut a little piece of it off. But instead of doing
Yeah,
that in 19, what they did in 1964, as you know, they just said, well, we're not going to put silver in the coins anymore. They're just going to be zinc and copper.
yeah,
We'll
a
leave the nickel.
sandwich, a sandwich.
Exactly, and it's ridiculous. But it's so they stole all the money then. So I mean, it's really. I don't know, Jeff. I don't know how much longer it can go on. And as far as the Chinese and the Russians in particular, the Chinese in particular, they want nothing to do with the collapse. They are distancing themselves, and if you've noticed, officially, they have hardly anything to say about what's going on in Russia and Ukraine as far as that whole situation. They aren't saying anything because I think that they understand that that is a distinct possibility that that will be the cover, or that that will be the birthplace of the war, that will be the
World
cover.
War III.
Exactly, that will be the cover for the collapse of the dollar. I mean, that's what.
And Western Empire.
Yes. So, and I wanted to ask you, as far
Go ahead.
um, as far as the transition, you're there in China, you're in Beijing. So if you get into the city and you see the gold markets and you see the trade, the physical gold being acquired and moving around from hand to hand, do you see the Chinese moving towards a gold-backed yuan or renminbi, or what do you see the Chinese doing with all of this gold that they're acquiring?
Yeah, that's an interesting. That's another of the anti maneuvers that the Chinese and the Russians are doing. Is they're both producing. China actually was the number one gold producer last year.
Yes.
465 tons. Russia was the second biggest producer with 275 or 80 tons. They're both buying everything they can get their hands on. The amount of gold that the Chinese actually have in reserve is a state secret, which is probably pretty smart. The last time it was officially reported was a number of years ago, and it was only 1,000 tons. So there's a lot of speculation that, and that's what they still officially report,
Right.
from 10 years ago. And so it's a bit of a cat and mouse game as to guess how much they have. The latest I've heard is they think they have somewhere over right at 3,000 metric tons, which would put them right, in second or third place, right around with Germany. Of course, there's a lot of speculation that the Americans don't have nearly as much gold as their 8,000 tons reported.
They don't have
since they don't seem to have any to give the Germans who've asked for it back.
Right.
And so I don't know. I've read. I think it was on Zero Hedge. I read an article. The price of gold would have to be so astronomically, huge per ounce or per gram or whatever because of limited quantities. But I think for it to become gold based again, because the world economy has gotten so huge. Trillions and trillions of dollars. So I don't know if they can do that, but I think what they want to do is they want to be able to say we are major holders of gold, and the psychological, we've got the gold, we've got the manufacturing, we've got the infrastructure. We have got our markets here in Eurasia, from Madrid to Shanghai, with Moscow in between, and I think it's more of a psychological thing. I'm not enough of an economist to say whether any country right now could go on to a gold standard just because of limited world supplies. Do you have any information about that? I mean, could a China or could a Russia go to? I've even been hearing rumors about Russia trying to go to a gold standard, but its economy is, about 1/10 of China's. So, what do you think?
I don't know, and I can't speculate because I, like you, I'm not an economist. I was trying to get a feel for, since you are in Beijing, I thought that there may be information there that we're not
there's
hearing
rumors.
here.
There's rumors.
We got plenty of rumors.
Yeah. No, there's no announcement. There's nothing official. There's nothing there's no news. There's nothing about it. Again, they won't even report how much gold they've got.
Right.
They did report, that they were produced 465 tons last year. I guarantee you not a gram of that, probably left the country.
Oh, no.
Russia was number two, I think, at about 275 metric tons. And so maybe that's something the next time you talk to David at Investment Research Dynamics, maybe he can put some light on this subject. I mean, I saw something that the gold would have to be, hundreds of thousands of dollars an ounce.
No,
if anybody wanted to try to monetize. That's not true?
No, I can say with confidence, and I have I have enough confidence in this person that I feel that I can say this, and that's that Jim Rickards has said that between 7,000 and 9,000 an ounce would be.
Okay, 7,000 to 9,000.
Because you have to remember, I mean, if it's France before, what was it, 3 years ago that they were at 40% backing. Or it was, I can't remember when they dropped it, but they were at 40% backing. Now you can do that, but I want to say this: the golden rule still applies. The golden rule still applies.
Whoever has the gold rules.
Whoever has the gold makes the rules. So, and I think that in large part is what's happening with the East. Not just China, but you have China and Russia working in tandem.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not fooling around. And the thing is that they're not gathering up and collecting all of this gold for trinkets, for jewelry.
For jewelry.
Yeah, they're not. That's not what's going on here. You don't dig 465 tons out of the ground so that you can make another bracelet.
That's right.
Now, I'd read that
go ahead.
I'd read that they were building like 2,000 ounce or 2,000 ton vaults all over China. Are you familiar with that at all?
I'll look into that. I'll jot that down to see for our next. Because
that's a pretty big deal, and I can't remember where I'd read that, but I remember it being a credible source, but they were supposedly building all of these vaults all over China, and it was in relation to the Shanghai Gold Exchange.
I'm sure they are, because I mean the London Metal Exchange is still dwarfs Shanghai, and even if you combine Hong Kong. But like you said, 5 years ago the renminbi was nothing, and now China, the number one trading company in the country in the world. 25% of their trade last year was done in RMB. And so people tend to, well, this is what empire does. They deny. They want to see their favored truths. They want to see their favored. They want people to believe in their favored myths, and no one wants to admit, that the Chinese are building, the metal exchange, the gold exchange. And the other interesting thing about the Shanghai gold exchange, Rory, is they don't do futures. It's all physical.
Correct.
They don't do any futures. It's all physical. It's all physical gold.
That is correct.
It's just bullion.
Yep.
And so and so what's going to happen is, in 10 years, people are going to wake up and go, oh, what happened to the London Metal Exchange? Because Shanghai and Hong Kong are going to probably dominate. I mean, that's just the way it's been going on now for the last 30 years, since the West, as you said, cranked out the printing presses and '70s, and then exported their manufacturing in the '80s.
Yep.
This has just been ongoing since. How old are you, Rory? I'm going to be 61 next month. How old are you?
52. I'll be 53 in May.
Okay, great. So you and I have come from that kind of. In '71, I was in 11th grade, and so I can sit there and remember all this kind. In the '80s, when I left the United States in 1980, to live overseas, and I can remember all this stuff that happening, and the OPEC, the creation of OPEC, and the gas prices going from 25 cents a gallon to $1 a gallon.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
Well, I think, Jeff, it's been great speaking with you, and I really
likewise. Let's do it again.
We will. Well, I can assure you that we most certainly will. And we've been speaking with Jeff Brown, who is the author of 44 Days, and that is the name of his website as well. It's 44days.net. And Jeff, why don't you give yourself a quick plug there?
Yeah, my website is 44 days, 44 the numbers 44 then days.net. My first book, as Rory just said, is called 44 Days Backpacking in China. It's a travel book, but it's also a metaphor for discovering China and the West and the history and the current events. It's more of a book about Chinese and international studies than it is a travel book. And my second book is actually, my editor is working on my second book, which is all of my columns on my website, Reflections in Sinoland. And then my third book I'm writing right now is Xi Jinping's Diaries. I'm just pretending I'm him and how he would write his diaries and how he perceives his life and his country and the world around him. So I encourage you to take a look at my website and read my columns until they become an ebook this summer. And then I actually am an English teacher, and I actually just published a book called Dr. Wright Reads Treasure Trove of Great English, but that's a totally different deal. But I'm actually that's also on Amazon. Dr. Wright Reads Treasure Trove of Great English. So Roy, it's been wonderful talking to you, and I really enjoy chatting with you and talking with you, and love all. In fact, I've already taken a half a page of notes just listening to you. So I've got a lot of homework to do, and I hope you do too.
I do, yes, sir.
And let's get together maybe in a month or two.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and we will speak soon. And I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in today. We'll talk to you later.